The heat of the flames scorched Cassandra Vail's skin as she watched her family's general store crumble to ash before her eyes. Her screams lost in the roar of the inferno, consuming the small town of Sweetwater Creek. The year was 1878, and everything she had ever known was disappearing into smoke that blackened the clear Colorado sky. Cassandra struggled against the strong hands of neighbors who held her back, her copper hair falling loose from its pins as she fought to return to the building where her father remained trapped. At 22 years old, she had already lost her mother to tuberculosis 2 winters past. Now, as the blaze consumed the wooden structures of Main Street with terrifying speed, she faced losing everything else. "Papa," she screamed, her throat raw from the smoke and shouting. "He's still in there. Someone help him." The townspeople around her wore expressions of helpless horror as they watched their livelihoods and homes devour themselves in hungry orange flames. Sheriff Milton was organizing a bucket brigade, but the effort seemed futile against the monster that had been unleashed when lightning struck the saloon during the worst drought in memory. "It's too late, Miss Vail," Mr. Peterson, the banker, said as he gripped her arm. No one could survive in there now. But Cassandra refused to believe it. With a strength born of desperation, she wrenched herself free and ran toward the inferno that had been her home and business for her entire life. The heat pushed against her like a wall, singing her eyebrows and making her skin feel tight and painful. She had almost reached the burning porch when a thundering of hooves cut through the crackling of the fire. A massive black stallion charged past the gathering of onlookers, its rider a tall figure silhouetted against the flames. Without slowing, the horse and rider barreled straight toward the burning building. Cassandra stumbled to a halt as the stranger, a man she had never seen before, leapt from his mount and wrapped his duster around his face and head. Without hesitation, he plunged into the burning doorway where she had been about to enter. Time seemed to stretch impossibly as Cassandra stood frozen, the flames reflecting in her wide green eyes. Prayers she hadn't said since childhood tumbled from her lips as she watched the doorway, waiting for any sign of movement. When the front wall began to groan and sag, her heart stopped. But then, through the billowing smoke, emerged a figure, the stranger, bent almost double under the weight of another man, her father. "Papa," Cassandra rushed forward as the cowboy staggered away from the building, dragging Gerald Vail with him. The older man was unconscious, his clothing singed, but his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The cowboy didn't pause to acknowledge the cheers of relief from the townspeople. In one fluid motion, he hoisted her father onto his horse and then turned to Cassandra. "Building's about to go," he said, his voice rough with smoke, his eyes a startling blue against his soot-darkened face fixed on hers. "The whole street's lost, fires spreading too fast." As if to confirm his words, a thunderous crash sounded behind them as the general store's roof collapsed inward, sending a geyser of sparks into the sky. The crowd scattered, screaming, as burning debris rained down. "Get on," the stranger commanded, extending his hand to her. But Cassandra looked around wildly at the chaos, at neighbors gathering what little they could salvage. "Now." There was such authority in his voice that Cassandra found herself grasping his hand before she could think. With surprising gentleness, he swung her up behind her father's slumped form. The cowboy vaulted up behind her, one arm securing her father, the other reaching around her to grab the reins. The stallion danced nervously beneath the unfamiliar weight of 3 riders. "Hold on to him," the stranger instructed, and Cassandra wrapped her arms around her father's waist as the cowboy spurred the horse forward. They galloped away from the burning town, the heat at their backs diminishing with every powerful stride of the horse. Cassandra glanced over her shoulder to see the church steeple topple in a shower of sparks. Main Street was now a corridor of flame, and people were fleeing in all directions. The cowboy didn't slow their pace as they thundered along the trail leading west out of town. The wind whipped tears from Cassandra's eyes, or perhaps they were tears for everything she was leaving behind. "Where are you taking us?" she called over the drumming of hooves. "Away," came the terse reply. "Fire's going to take the whole valley with this wind. We don't stop until we're clear." And so they rode, the stallion's powerful muscles driving them forward as behind them, Sweetwater Creek became a memory consumed by flame. Cassandra held her father tightly, feeling his labored breathing beneath her arms, and wondered what sort of man risked his life for strangers only to flee with them into the wilderness. They rode without stopping for nearly 2 hours, following a creek bed up into the foothills where the vegetation was sparser and the threat of fire diminished. Only when they reached a small clearing beside a spring did the cowboy finally rein in his exhausted horse. He dismounted in one fluid motion, then carefully helped Cassandra down before easing her father from the saddle. Gerald Vail groaned as the stranger laid him gently on a patch of soft grass. "He needs water," the cowboy said, already moving to the spring. Cassandra knelt beside her father, brushing ash from his face. His breathing was ragged, and angry red burns marked his hands and forearms. "Papa, can you hear me?" The older man's eyelids fluttered but remained closed. The cowboy returned with his hat filled with water. He knelt opposite Cassandra and supported Gerald's head while she helped him drink. For the first time, Cassandra truly saw their rescuer. Beneath the layer of soot and grime was a face of perhaps 30 years, weathered by sun and wind. His beard was short and neat, though now streaked with ash, and those remarkable blue eyes regarded her father with genuine concern. "Thank you," she said softly. "You saved his life." The man nodded once, then stood and moved to tend his horse. Cassandra watched as he removed the saddle and began wiping down the lathered animal with handfuls of grass. "My name is Cassandra Vail," she called to him. "This is my father, Gerald." The cowboy paused in his ministrations. "Flynn Ashwood," he replied after a moment's hesitation. "Sorry about your town. You're not from Sweetwater Creek. I would have remembered you." Flynn shook his head, was passing through, saw the smoke. He resumed caring for his horse, leaving Cassandra to wonder what kind of man rode toward a fire rather than away from it. As the adrenaline of their escape faded, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Cassandra had nothing but the clothes. She wore a simple blue cotton dress, now smudged with soot and torn at the hem. No home, no possessions, not even a coin purse. Everything she and her father owned had been in the store or the attached living quarters. A quiet sob escaped her before she could stop it. Flynn glanced over, his expression unreadable, then returned to his saddlebags. He extracted a worn blanket and brought it to her. "Night's coming," he said. "It'll get cold." Cassandra accepted the blanket with trembling hands. "What happens now? Where do we go?" Flynn crouched down, using a stick to clear a small area of debris. "Next town's Riverton, about 2 days' ride, but your pa needs rest before we try it." He began arranging stones in a circle. "I'll make a fire." "A fire?" Cassandra flinched at the word. A hint of understanding softened Flynn's features. "Just a small one, to keep warm and keep the critters away. We're far enough from the town fire." He hesitated, then added, "I won't let anything happen to you." Something in his voice, a quiet certainty, made Cassandra believe him. She nodded and turned her attention back to her father, whose face was creased with pain even in unconsciousness. As dusk fell, Flynn built a small, efficient fire and produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, which he shared without comment. Cassandra chewed mechanically, too numb to taste the food. Her father had awakened briefly, taken a few sips of water and a bite of food before drifting off again. "Will he be all right?" she asked, watching the firelight play across her father's face. Flynn studied the older man. "Burns don't look too deep. Smoke's what got him. Rest will help." He poked at the fire with a stick. "He was trying to save something when I found him, kept saying the box." Cassandra's heart clenched. "Mama's jewelry box. It has her wedding ring and the locket with her portrait." She blinked back tears. It was all we had left of her. Flynn said nothing, but his gaze lingered on her face for a moment before he turned away to check on his horse once more. As full darkness descended, Cassandra sat with her back against a boulder, her father's head pillowed in her lap. Flynn took up position on the other side of the fire, his rifle across his knees. In the dancing light, she studied him, the set of his shoulders, the watchful way he scanned the darkness beyond their small circle of safety. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly. "Run into the fire for strangers." Flynn's gaze remained fixed on the darkness. Seemed like the right thing to do. You could have died, a shrug. Everyone dies. Question is what you do before that happens. Cassandra pondered this. And now, why are you helping us? At this, Flynn's eyes met hers across the fire. Can't very well leave you out here alone, Miss Vail. Cassandra, she corrected. After what you've done, I think you can use my given name. The hint of a smile touched his lips. Cassandra, then, he added wood to the fire. Get some sleep, I'll keep watch. Despite the hard ground and the weight of all she had lost, exhaustion soon dragged Cassandra into a fitful sleep, her dreams filled with flames and falling buildings. She woke several times during the night, but each time she opened her eyes, Flynn was there, steady and vigilant, his presence an unexpected comfort in the wilderness. Morning brought a soft drizzle that seemed to mock the previous day's catastrophe. Cassandra awoke stiff and disoriented, her father still asleep beside her. Flynn had already rekindled the fire and was brewing coffee in a small tin pot. Storm's coming, he said, nodding toward the darkening western sky. Need shelter before it hits. There's an old line shack about 4 hours' ride from here, if your pa can travel. As if summoned by the mention, Gerald Vail stirred and opened his eyes. Confusion gave way to recognition as he looked at his daughter, then pain as memory returned. Cassie, his voice was a rasp. The store. Cassandra gently helped him sit up. It's gone, Papa. The whole town was burning when we left. She handed him water from Flynn's canteen. This is Mr. Ashwood. He pulled you from the fire. Gerald's bleary gaze focused on the cowboy. You went in after me. Flynn nodded once, uncomfortable with the gratitude in the older man's eyes. Need to know if you can ride, Mr. Vail. Storm's coming and we need better shelter. Gerald winced as he tested his limbs. Burns marked his forearms and his breathing still held a worrying rattle, but he nodded determinedly. I can ride. They broke camp quickly, Flynn efficiently packing his few supplies. The stallion, rested and watered, accepted all 3 riders again, though Flynn led him at a much gentler pace than their desperate flight of the previous day. As they rode, Cassandra's thoughts returned to everything she had lost. The general store had been her family's livelihood since before she was born. Her father had built it with his own hands, expanded it as the town grew. After her mother died, Cassandra had taken over the books and much of the day-to-day running of the business while her father's health gradually declined. Now it was all gone. What will we do? She asked her father, her voice low. Gerald patted her hand where it rested around his waist. We'll rebuild, Cassie. We still have the land even if the building's gone. Flynn, riding behind them both, spoke up. Whole town was burning, might not be anything to go back to. Gerald's shoulders slumped. Then we'll start fresh somewhere else. We've done it before. They rode in silence after that, each lost in private thoughts as the sky continued to darken. By midday, the drizzle had strengthened to a steady rain, and Flynn urged the stallion to a faster pace. The line shack appeared just as the first rumbles of thunder echoed across the hills, a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. It wasn't much, just a single room with a stone fireplace and a dirt floor, but it was shelter from the worsening storm. Flynn helped Gerald inside while Cassandra collected rainwater in the cooking pot. The interior was dusty but relatively clean. A rough-hewn table, 2 3-legged stools, and a narrow cot were the only furniture. Used by the ranchers when they're working this part of the range, Flynn explained as he settled Gerald on the cot. Nobody'll mind us using it in an emergency. The fire Flynn built in the stone hearth soon warmed the small space, and the steady drum of rain on the wooden roof created a cocoon of sound that isolated them from the outside world. Gerald drifted into an exhausted sleep, while Flynn checked and cleaned his guns at the table. Cassandra sat by the fire, combing her fingers through her tangled hair and trying to bring some order to her appearance. She was acutely aware of how disheveled she must look, her dress soot-stained and torn, her hair a mess, her face dirty. Here. Flynn's voice startled her. He held out a small bar of soap and a clean bandana. Springs right outside under the overhang, rain's letting up a bit. Cassandra accepted the items gratefully. Thank you for everything. Flynn nodded and returned to his weapons. Cassandra stepped outside, finding the small spring he had mentioned protected by an extension of the cabin's roof. The rain had indeed lessened to a gentle patter, and she gratefully washed her face and hands, then did her best to clean the worst of the grime from her dress. When she returned inside, feeling marginally more human, she found Flynn had produced more provisions from his saddlebag's dried apples, more jerky, and a small packet of tea. "Not much of a meal," he said apologetically, "but it'll keep us going." Cassandra sat across from him at the small table. "You're well prepared for traveling, always am." He pushed some of the dried fruit toward her. "Been on the move a long time. Where are you from originally?" she asked, curious about this quiet, capable man who had saved their lives. Flynn hesitated, as if weighing how much to share. "East originally, Pennsylvania, left home young, been all over since then." "And where were you headed when you saw our town burning?" "Nowhere in particular." He sipped his coffee. "Just riding." Cassandra studied him, sensing there was more to his story but respecting his reticence. "Well, I'm glad your nowhere in particular brought you to Sweetwater Creek yesterday." A ghost of a smile touched Flynn's lips. "So am I." They passed the afternoon in the small cabin as the storm raged outside. Gerald slept for hours, his body recovering from the trauma and smoke. Cassandra tended to his burns with a salve Flynn produced from his seemingly bottomless saddlebags. The cowboy himself alternated between checking on his horse in the lean-to he'd constructed and sitting by the fire, occasionally whittling at a piece of wood with a sharp knife. As evening approached, the rain finally stopped, and a watery sun broke through the clouds. Flynn stepped outside to gather more firewood while Cassandra prepared a simple meal from their limited supplies. "He's a strange one," Gerald commented quietly, now awake and sitting up on the cot. "Not many men would do what he did." Cassandra glanced toward the door. "I know, I keep wondering why. Some men just have goodness in them, Cassie, simple as that." Gerald coughed, wincing at the pain in his chest. "Though I reckon he's running from something, got that look about him." Before Cassandra could respond, Flynn returned with an armload of wood. He paused, sensing the conversation had been about him, but said nothing as he stacked the logs by the fireplace. They ate in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the small cabin growing cozy with the warmth of the fire. Gerald shared stories of the early days of Sweetwater Creek, when it was nothing but a trading post and a few hopeful settlers. Flynn listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed a keen understanding of frontier life. "And what about you, Mr. Ashwood?" Gerald finally asked. "What's your story?" Flynn set down his tin cup. "Not much to tell." "Everyone has a story," Gerald pressed gently, "especially a man who rides into burning buildings." For a long moment it seemed Flynn wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Was a soldier. After the war, rode with the law for a while, then on my own." His eyes flickered to the fire, "Made some enemies along the way." "Is that why you're always moving?" Cassandra asked. "Because of these enemies," Flynn's gaze met hers. "Partly. Also never found a reason to stay in one place." He stood, ending the conversation. "Should check the horse before turning in." When he had gone outside, Gerald looked meaningfully at his daughter. "That's a man carrying burdens, Cassie." "We all have burdens, Papa," she replied, thinking of all they had lost. "True enough. But his seemed heavier than most." Flynn returned and announced he would sleep outside with his horse, ensuring no one approached the cabin undetected. Despite Cassandra's protests that there was room by the fire, he was firm in his decision, taking only a blanket as he stepped out into the night. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Cassandra awoke to find the cabin empty except for her father still sleeping. Outside, Flynn was already saddling his horse. "You're leaving?" she asked, alarmed. Flynn shook his head. "Getting ready. Need to reach Riverton by nightfall if your father's up to it. There's a doctor there." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you." Again, Flynn paused in his work. "You don't need to keep thanking me." "I do, though." Cassandra stepped closer, gathering her courage. "Mr. Ashwood Flynn, I have nothing to offer in return for your help. My father and I lost everything in that fire. Not asking for payment, I know. That's what makes your kindness even more remarkable." She touched his arm lightly. "I just want you to know how grateful I am." Flynn looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight release of tension in his jaw. For a moment, Cassandra thought he might say something personal, something beyond his usual terse responses. Instead, he simply nodded. "Your father's awake, should eat before we ride." The journey to Riverton took most of the day. Gerald was stronger but still weak, and they stopped frequently to rest. Flynn remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his hand never far from his gun. "Are you expecting trouble?" Cassandra asked during one such stop. Flynn helped her father sit in the shade of a lone pine. "Always best to expect it, then you're not surprised when it finds you. That's a grim way to live. It's kept me alive." He handed her the canteen. "Your father needs water." As they traveled, Cassandra found herself studying Flynn when he wasn't looking, the straight line of his shoulders, the quiet competence in everything he did, the occasional softening of his expression when he thought no one was watching. He was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, this man who risked his life for strangers and then cared for them with such unexpected gentleness. They reached Riverton as the sun was setting, the small town nestled in a valley much like Sweetwater Creek had been. Unlike their hometown, however, Riverton was built primarily of brick and stone, a response, Flynn explained, to a fire that had nearly destroyed it 15 years earlier. The town doctor, a gruff older man named Phillips, examined Gerald carefully, pronouncing the burns minor but the smoke inhalation more concerning. He prescribed rest and a salve for the burns, insisting Gerald remain in town for at least a week. The problem of lodging was solved by the doctor's wife, who maintained a small boarding house attached to their home. Mrs. Phillips, a motherly woman with quick eyes and quicker hands, took one look at Cassandra's bedraggled appearance and immediately whisked her away for a bath and clean clothes. "Poor dear," she clucked as she helped Cassandra wash her hair in a copper tub. "To lose everything like that, but you're safe now, and that's what matters." Cassandra sank into the warm water gratefully. "It's all thanks to Mr. Ashwood." Mrs. Phillips handed her a bar of lavender soap. "The quiet one. He's taking a room here too, though I'm not sure for how long. Seems the restless type." The news that Flynn was staying surprised Cassandra. She had half expected him to disappear now that he had delivered them safely to civilization. The thought that he might leave without a proper goodbye had been weighing on her, though she hardly understood why his departure should matter so much after knowing him such a short time. Clean and dressed in a borrowed nightgown, Cassandra found her father settled comfortably in a small room with a real bed, a luxury after their wilderness accommodations. Flynn was nowhere to be seen. "He's gone to the livery to see to his horse," Gerald told her, noting her searching glance. "Said he'd be back." Cassandra sat on the edge of her father's bed. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Doctor says I'll recover fully with time." He took her hand. "Now, we need to talk about what comes next. I spoke with the telegraph operator while you were bathing." "Most of Sweetwater Creek is gone, Cassie. The fire took almost everything." Though she had expected as much, the confirmation still hit her hard. "What about the people?" "Some injuries, but no deaths, thank the Lord. Everyone got out in time." He squeezed her hand. "But we have decisions to make. We could return and rebuild, but it would mean starting from nothing. Or we could start fresh elsewhere." "What do you want to do, Papa?" Gerald sighed. "I'm too old to rebuild from ashes, Cassie. Your mother and I did it once when we first came west. I don't have it in me to do it again." He looked at her with sad eyes. "But I won't make that decision for you. It's your future too." Cassandra thought of the store where she had grown up, of the friends and community they had left behind, but she also thought of the opportunities a new beginning might offer. "I don't know, Papa." "I need time to think," Gerald nodded. "We have a little money in the bank in Denver, not much but enough to get started somewhere. There's no rush to decide." A knock at the door interrupted them. Flynn stood in the doorway, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. His presence filled the small room in a way Cassandra couldn't quite define. "Doctor says you're doing better," he said to Gerald. "Thanks to you." Gerald gestured for him to enter. "We were just discussing our future plans." Flynn remained in the doorway. "Came to tell you I'll be moving on tomorrow. Wanted to make sure you were settled first." Cassandra felt a pang of disappointment sharper than she expected. "So soon?" Flynn shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the emotion in her voice. Best that way. Gerald looked between the two of them, understanding something Cassandra herself did not fully comprehend. We're grateful for everything you've done, Flynn. If there's ever anything we can do for you, you need only ask. The cowboy nodded. Get some rest. I'll look in before I leave in the morning. His eyes lingered on Cassandra for a moment before he turned and walked away. After he had gone, Gerald watched his daughter's face thoughtfully. He's a good man, Cassie, despite whatever ghosts he's carrying. I know, she replied softly, still staring at the empty doorway. That night, Cassandra lay awake in her small room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house. Sleep eluded her as her mind turned over everything that had happened and the uncertain future ahead. The thought of Flynn leaving in the morning left her with an emptiness she couldn't explain. Just before dawn, she gave up on sleep and dressed quietly in the clothes Mrs. Phillips had lent her, a simple brown skirt and white blouse, plain but clean. She made her way downstairs, hoping for tea, and found Flynn in the small kitchen, already dressed for travel. He looked up as she entered, surprise flashing briefly in his eyes. You're up early. I couldn't sleep. Cassandra moved to the stove where a kettle was heating. Tea. Flynn shook his head. Coffee's fine. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the silence between them comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. Cassandra searched for the right words to express what she was feeling. Where will you go? She finally asked. Flynn shrugged. West, maybe. Heard there's work in the mountains. Will you write to let us know you're safe? A hint of amusement touched his lips. Worried about me, Miss Vail, Cassandra, she corrected automatically. And yes, I am. The amusement faded, replaced by something more serious. Been taking care of myself a long time. That doesn't mean someone shouldn't worry about you. She reached across the table, hesitating before placing her hand over his. You saved our lives, Flynn. You're not a stranger anymore. Flynn looked down at her hand on his, then slowly turned his palm upward until their fingers interlaced. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate that Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. Never been good at staying in one place, he said quietly, or at letting people get close. Why? She asked, equally soft. Flynn's eyes met hers, and for the first time he didn't look away. Because losing people hurts. Easier not to have anyone to lose. The rawness of his admission touched something deep inside her. But isn't it lonely? Yes. The single word held volumes of meaning. His fingers tightened slightly around hers. It is. The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant. Cassandra felt a connection to this quiet, complicated man that defied the short time they had known each other. There was something about Flynn Ashwood that called to her, perhaps his strength, perhaps his hidden gentleness, or perhaps simply the way he looked at her as if truly seeing her. The spell was broken by footsteps on the stairs. Flynn withdrew his hand as Mrs. Phillips bustled into the kitchen, already talking about breakfast preparations. Cassandra felt the loss of his touch like a physical thing. Throughout breakfast, Flynn was his usual quiet self, answering Mrs. Phillips' friendly questions with polite but brief responses. Gerald joined them, moving slowly but looking better after a night in a real bed. When the meal was done, Flynn rose and announced it was time for him to leave. Outside, his stallion waited, saddled and ready. Flynn secured his few belongings and checked the cinch one last time. Gerald shook his hand warmly, again expressing gratitude that the cowboy waved away uncomfortably. Then it was Cassandra's turn to say goodbye. She stood before him, suddenly unsure what to say or do. I wish you wouldn't go, she said simply. Flynn's expression softened. Not sure that's wise, Cassandra. Why not? Because I'm not the staying kind, she stepped closer. Maybe you haven't had the right reason to stay. Something flashed in his eyes, yearning, perhaps quickly masked. Take care of your father, he needs you. And what about what I need? The boldness of her own words surprised her. Flynn's gaze intensified. What do you need, Cassandra Vail? I need to not wonder for the rest of my life what might have happened if you had stayed just a little longer. Her heart hammered in her chest at her own daring. For a long moment, Flynn simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out and touched her cheek, a feather-light caress that sent warmth spreading through her. 3 days, he said finally. I'll stay 3 more days, then we'll see. Relief and joy flooded through her. 3 days is a good start. Flynn's lips quirked in that almost smile that was becoming familiar. You're a stubborn woman, Cassandra Vail. You have no idea, she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. Those 3 days stretched into a week, then 2. Flynn found work at the livery stable, his way with horses quickly impressing the owner. Gerald continued to recover, though the doctor warned it would be months before his lungs fully healed from the smoke damage. Cassandra obtained a position at the general store, her experience from running her father's business making her an invaluable assistant to the elderly owner. Each evening, she, Flynn, and Gerald shared meals at the boarding house, their conversations growing longer and more personal as the days passed. Flynn gradually revealed more of himself, how he had fought for the Union in the war, then worked as a deputy marshal in Kansas before striking out on his own. He spoke little of family, only mentioning that his parents had died when he was young and he had no siblings. "What made you leave the marshal service?" Cassandra asked one evening as they walked together after dinner, a habit they had developed. Flynn was silent for several steps. "Shot a bad man who deserved it, but his family didn't see it that way, put a bounty on my head." His voice was matter of fact, but Cassandra sensed the weight of the memory. "Decided it was safer for everyone if I kept moving." "Is that why you're always watching the horizon? You think they're still looking for you?" "It was 5 years ago." "But men with long memories and deep pockets can be patient." He glanced at her. "That's why staying isn't smart." Cassandra stopped walking, forcing him to turn and face her. "Is that the only reason you're still here? Because I asked you to stay." The question hung between them in the twilight. Flynn studied her face, his expression softening in a way that had become more frequent in recent days. "No," he admitted finally, "not the only reason." "Then why?" Instead of answering with words, Flynn slowly reached for her hand. His calloused fingers entwined with hers, the gesture more eloquent than any speech. Cassandra's heart raced as he drew her slightly closer. "I've never met anyone like you," he said quietly. "Someone who sees good in everything, even in me." "There is good in you," she insisted. "More than you know." Flynn's free hand came up to touch her face, tracing the line of her cheek with gentle fingers. Cassandra held her breath as he leaned forward, his intention clear. When his lips met hers, the kiss was soft and questioning, a man unused to tenderness offering what he could. Cassandra responded with all the emotion that had been building since he had carried her away from the burning remains of her old life. She felt him hesitate, then surrender to the moment, his arms encircling her as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, Flynn rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "This changes things," he murmured. "For the better," she replied, her hands resting on his chest. "Cassandra." The way he said her name like a prayer and a question at once made her heart constrict. "I'm not good at this, at letting myself care." "Then let me show you how," she smiled up at him. "I think I'm getting quite good at it." A real smile, perhaps the first she had seen from him, transformed his face, making him look younger and unburdened. "You certainly are." As they walked back to the boarding house, hands still linked, Cassandra felt a sense of possibility she had not experienced since before the fire. Whatever the future held, she knew with certainty that Flynn Ashwood had become essential to it. The following weeks brought changes both subtle and profound. Flynn took on more responsibilities at the livery, eventually partnering with the owner who was eager to semi-retire. Gerald's health improved steadily, though he tired easily and required frequent rest. And Cassandra flourished in her work at the general store, her business acumen earning her the respect of Riverton's merchants. Through it all, the connection between Cassandra and Flynn deepened. Their evening walks became a cherished ritual, a time for sharing thoughts and dreams, for learning each other's stories. Flynn spoke more freely of his past, the good and the bad, while Cassandra shared her hopes for the future. "I've been thinking," she told him one evening as they sat on a bench overlooking the small town square, "about starting my own shop here. Something small at first, ladies' hats and accessories, perhaps, things the general store doesn't carry." Flynn's arm rested comfortably around her shoulders. "You'd be good at that. You understand what people need sometimes before they do." "Is that what I did with you?" she teased, Understood what you needed before you did, he chuckled, a sound that had become less rare. Maybe so. His expression grew more serious. Your father tells me he's decided not to return to Sweetwater Creek. Cassandra nodded. He wants to write to his brother in San Francisco, perhaps move there eventually. The climate would be better for his lungs. She hesitated. But I don't think I want to go to California. No. Flynn's voice was carefully neutral. No. She turned to face him fully. I think I'd like to stay here, in Riverton. The implication hung in the air between them. Flynn studied her face, his blue eyes intense. Cassandra, I can't promise. I'm not asking for promises, she interrupted gently. I'm just telling you what I want. What happens next is up to you. Before he could respond, a commotion at the far end of the square caught their attention. A group of riders had entered the town, dust-covered and trail-worn. Even from a distance, Cassandra could see the way Flynn tensed, his posture suddenly alert. What is it? She asked, alarmed by the change in him. Flynn stood, pulling her up with him. We need to go now. Flynn, what those men? His voice was tight. I recognize one of them. Works for the Harlow family. His eyes met hers, urgent and worried. The people who want me dead. Fear clutched at Cassandra's heart. Are you sure? Certain. He took her arm, guiding her quickly away from the square. Need to get you somewhere safe, then figure out what to do. They hurried back to the boarding house, Flynn constantly glancing over his shoulder. Once inside, he quickly explained the situation to Gerald, who immediately grasped the seriousness of their predicament. You need to leave town, the older man said, his face grave. If they're here for me, they won't stop looking, Flynn replied, and I won't bring trouble to your door. He turned to Cassandra, his expression pained. I have to go, no. Her response was immediate and fierce. You're not running anymore, Cassandra, no, Flynn. Running hasn't solved anything, it's just kept you alone. She gripped his hands tightly. There are other options. Like what? The bitterness in his voice was a glimpse of the solitary man he had been before, like facing this together. She looked to her father. Papa, could you get Sheriff Tanner? He should hear this. Gerald nodded and left while Cassandra led Flynn to sit at the small table. Tell me everything, who these men are, what happened with the Harlows, all of it. Flynn ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had come to recognize. I told you I was a deputy marshal in Kansas. 5 years ago, I was tracking a gang that had robbed a bank in Topeka. One of them was Jack Harlow, son of Vincent Harlow, a wealthy rancher with political connections. What happened? I cornered Jack and his men in a saloon. It got ugly. Jack drew on me and I shot him. He died. Flynn's eyes were distant with memory. It was a clean shooting. He had his gun out. Witnesses saw it. But Vincent Harlow didn't care. His son was dead and someone had to pay. So he put a price on your head, Flynn nodded. Not officially, but word got around that he'd pay handsomely for information on my whereabouts. Had to turn in my badge, move on. Been moving ever since. Cassandra squeezed his hand. Until now. The door opened as Gerald returned with Sheriff Tanner, a solid man with a no-nonsense manner. Flynn tensed but remained seated as Cassandra quickly explained the situation. The sheriff listened carefully, then addressed Flynn directly. I know of Vincent Harlow. Man has money and influence, but he's not above the law. He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. If you were acting as a lawman when you shot his son and it was justified, then you've done nothing wrong. Harlow doesn't see it that way, Flynn replied. Doesn't matter how he sees it. Law's the law. Tanner straightened. I'll go have a word with these newcomers, find out what brings them to Riverton. In the meantime, you stay put. He fixed Flynn with a stern look. No running, Ashwood. Running makes you look guilty, and from what I've heard, you aren't. After the sheriff left, Flynn paced the small room like a caged animal. Cassandra watched him, understanding his instinct to flee but determined not to let him go. Flynn, she said softly, trust me, trust Sheriff Tanner. We can resolve this. He stopped pacing to look at her, conflict evident in his face. If anything happened to you because of me, nothing will happen to me. She rose and went to him, placing her hands on his chest. I lost everything in that fire except my father. Then you came and gave me hope again. I'm not losing you too. Flynn's resistance crumbled visibly. He gathered her into his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid she might disappear. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he murmured into her hair. Thank goodness, she replied, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Otherwise, you'd already be halfway to the next territory." A tense hour passed before Sheriff Tanner returned. Flynn had composed himself somewhat, though he still positioned himself protectively near Cassandra. "Well," Tanner said without preamble, "you were right about one thing. They're Harlow's men, all right. 4 of them, led by a fellow named Curtis." Flynn's jaw tightened. Curtis was Harlow's foreman, mean piece of work. He claims they're just passing through looking to buy cattle. Tanner's expression was skeptical, but they were asking questions about new arrivals in town, seems mighty interested in strangers who might have come through recently. "They're looking for me," Flynn confirmed grimly. "Seems likely." The sheriff settled his hat more firmly on his head. "Here's what we're going to do. I've sent a telegram to the federal marshal's office in Denver asking them to confirm your story and your service. In the meantime, you 3 stay here out of sight. I'll keep an eye on Harlow's men. And if they find me," Flynn asked, "they won't." "Not unless they want to deal with me." Tanner's hand rested meaningfully on his gun. "This is my town, Ashwood. I don't take kindly to outsiders bringing trouble here. That goes for them and for you. So you stay put and let me handle this." After the sheriff left, Gerald excused himself to rest, leaving Cassandra and Flynn alone in the small sitting room. Flynn resumed his pacing, the tension in his body evident in every movement. "Flynn," Cassandra said gently, "come sit with me." He hesitated, then obeyed, sinking onto the sofa beside her. Cassandra took his hand, running her thumb over his knuckles in a soothing rhythm. "All these years," she said thoughtfully, "you've been running from this moment, but maybe it was always going to come." Flynn's gaze was fixed on their joined hands. "I just wanted to be left alone, to forget it all." And now, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "Now I want more than that, because of you." Cassandra's heart swelled at the admission. "Then we'll face this together, and when it's over, we'll talk about what comes next. What if it doesn't end well?" The fear in his voice wasn't for himself, she realized, but for her. She leaned forward and kissed him gently. "It will, I believe that." The next morning brought news. Sheriff Tanner arrived early, his expression guarded but satisfied. "Got a reply from Denver," he announced. "They confirmed your service record, Ashwood, clean as a whistle. The shooting of Jack Harlow was ruled justified by a county judge. You're in the clear, legally speaking." Flynn absorbed this with a nod. "Harlow won't care about legal." "No, but I do." Tanner's voice hardened. "I've invited Curtis and his men to my office at noon, suggested they might want to hear some interesting news about their business here. I think you should be there too, Ashwood." Flynn stiffened. "That's walking into the lion's den. No, it's facing your past head-on, with the law beside you." Tanner looked to Cassandra and Gerald. "You 2 should stay here, I'm coming," Cassandra said immediately. Both men began to protest, but she held up her hand. "I'm not discussing this. Where Flynn goes, I go." The look Flynn gave her was equal parts exasperation and admiration. "Stubborn," he muttered, but didn't argue further. At noon, they gathered at the sheriff's office, Tanner behind his desk, Flynn standing tensely by the window, Cassandra seated nearby, and Gerald, who had insisted on coming despite everyone's objections, in a chair by the door. The 4 men who entered were trail-hardened and suspicious, led by a tall, lean man with cold eyes whom Cassandra immediately identified as Curtis. His gaze swept the room, narrowing when it landed on Flynn. "Well," he drawled, "if it isn't Flynn Ashwood himself. Saves us the trouble of hunting you down." "That's enough," Tanner barked. "You're in my office, Curtis, and you'll mind your manners." Curtis sneered but fell silent. Flynn remained by the window, his posture deceptively relaxed, though Cassandra could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "I've asked you here," Tanner continued, "because I want to be clear about something. Mr. Ashwood is under my protection. I've received confirmation from the federal marshal's office that the shooting of Jack Harlow was ruled justified self-defense. There are no charges against him and no legal reason for you to pursue him." Curtis spat on the floor. "Law don't matter to Mr. Harlow. His boy is dead." "That's regrettable," Tanner replied coolly, "but it doesn't change the facts. Now you have 2 choices. You can ride out of Riverton today and tell Vincent Harlow that his vendetta is over. Or you can try something foolish and end up in my jail, or worse." The threat hung in the air. Curtis's eyes darted from Tanner to Flynn and back again, calculating odds. "Mr. Harlow won't accept this," he said finally. "Then Mr. Harlow can come talk to me himself." Tanner stood. "But I think he's smarter than that. 5 years is a long time to chase a ghost, especially when that ghost was just doing his job." Flynn spoke for the first time. "Tell Harlow I'm done running. If he wants me, he knows where to find me, but he should know I won't be alone anymore." His eyes met Curtis's steadily. "And I've never been an easy man to kill." A tense silence followed. Curtis's men shifted uneasily, looking to their leader for direction. Finally, Curtis gave a curt nod. "I'll deliver your message, but don't think this is over, Ashwood." "It is over," Cassandra said suddenly, rising to stand beside Flynn. "It's been over for 5 years. Your employer just hasn't accepted it yet." Curtis looked at her with newfound interest. "And who might you be, madam?" "Someone who cares about Flynn Ashwood," she replied evenly. "Someone who believes the past should stay in the past. Someone who isn't afraid of men like you or Vincent Harlow." A flicker of something, perhaps respect, perhaps surprise, crossed Curtis's face. He tipped his hat mockingly. "Well, ain't that touching?" The gunman found himself a woman to hide behind. Flynn moved so quickly that Cassandra barely saw it. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Curtis by the collar, shoved against the wall. The other men reached for their weapons, but Tanner's shotgun materialized in his hands before they could draw. "Easy, boys," the sheriff warned. "Nobody needs to die today." Flynn's voice was low and dangerous. "You can insult me all you want, Curtis. But you speak one more word against her, and Harlow will be looking for a new foreman." He released the man with a shove. "Now get out of my sight." Curtis straightened his jacket, his face flushed with anger but his eyes wary. "This ain't over," he repeated, but the conviction had gone from his voice. He gestured to his men and they filed out of the office. Sheriff Tanner moved to the window, watching as the four mounted their horses. "They're riding out," he reported, "heading east." Flynn's posture remained tense until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Only then did he turn to Cassandra, concern etched on his face. "You shouldn't have spoken up. Curtis isn't a man to forget a slight." "I'm not afraid of him," she replied, though her hands trembled slightly. "And I meant what I said. This needs to end, Flynn. You can't spend your whole life looking over your shoulder." Gerald, who had watched the entire exchange in silence, cleared his throat. "The young lady's right, Flynn, and I think you handled that just right. Showed strength without unnecessary violence." Tanner nodded in agreement. "Harlow's the type who respects strength. When Curtis tells him you're not running anymore, that you've got the law and the town behind you," he shrugged. "My guess is he'll decide you're not worth the trouble after all this time." Flynn looked unconvinced, but he didn't argue. As they left the sheriff's office, he kept Cassandra close, his eyes constantly scanning the street. The town continued its normal activities, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. That evening, as they sat in the parlor of the boarding house, Gerald announced his decision to visit his brother in San Francisco. "Just for a few weeks," he assured Cassandra. "To see if the climate agrees with me as much as the doctors claim, and to give you two some time to sort out your future without an old man underfoot." "Papa, you're not." Gerald held up his hand. "Cassie, I've watched you these past weeks. You found something here, a purpose, maybe even a home." His eyes twinkled as they darted to Flynn, and perhaps something else as well. Flynn, seated beside Cassandra on the sofa, met Gerald's gaze steadily. "Sir, I won't pretend I'm worthy of your daughter, but if she'll have me, I'd like your blessing to court her properly." Cassandra's heart leapt at the formal words. She turned to Flynn in surprise, finding his expression serious but tender. Gerald smiled broadly. "Flynn, my boy, you saved both our lives. You've proven your worth 100 times over. If Cassie wants you, you have my blessing without reservation." Flynn's shoulders relaxed visibly. He turned to Cassandra, taking her hands in his. "I'm not good with words, never have been, but these weeks with you." He paused, struggling. "You make me want to stop running, to build something lasting." "Flynn," she breathed, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't promise it will be easy. Harlow may still come looking for trouble, but I promise I won't run from it or from you ever again." His blue eyes were earnest, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. "If you'll stand with me, I'll spend every day trying to be the man you deserve." Cassandra didn't hesitate. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. The good and the bad, the easy and the hard, all of it, as long as we're together. The kiss they shared was a promise of faith in each other, of a future neither had dared imagine before the fire that had brought them together. Gerald discreetly excused himself, leaving them to their moment of joy. The following weeks brought rapid change. Gerald departed for San Francisco with promises to write often. Flynn and Cassandra began planning their future together, with Flynn purchasing a small house on the edge of town that needed considerable work, but had good bones and a view of the mountains. Cassandra secured a loan from the bank, using the insurance money from the Sweetwater Creek store as collateral, and opened a small shop selling ladies' apparel and accessories. Her business acumen and friendly manner quickly won her a loyal clientele. Flynn's partnership at the livery flourished, his way with horses drawing customers from neighboring towns. He also occasionally rode with Sheriff Tanner when extra deputies were needed, gradually earning the respect and trust of Riverton's citizens. Through it all, they waited for word of Vincent Harlow or his men, but none came. It seemed Tanner's prediction had been correct. The wealthy rancher had finally decided his vendetta wasn't worth pursuing. 3 months after Curtis and his men rode out of town, Flynn and Cassandra were married in a simple ceremony in Riverton's small church. The town turned out to celebrate, having embraced the couple as their own. Gerald returned from San Francisco for the occasion, looking healthier than he had in years and full of tales of his brother's shipping business. As the bride and groom shared their first dance at the reception held in the town hall, Flynn held Cassandra close, still marveling that this remarkable woman had chosen him. "Happy Mrs. Ashwood," he murmured against her ear. Cassandra smiled up at him, her green eyes bright with joy. "More than I ever thought possible." She glanced around at the decorated hall, at the townspeople who had become friends, at her father chatting animatedly with the doctor. "When I watched Sweetwater Creek burn, I thought I had lost everything. I never imagined the fire would lead me to everything I never knew I wanted." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "I was just passing through," he said wonderingly. "If I had been an hour earlier or later." "But you weren't," she reminded him. "You were exactly where you needed to be. Where we both needed to be." Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their newly finished home, Flynn pulled Cassandra into his arms. Above them, stars scattered across the Colorado sky like diamond dust, and the distant mountains stood sentinel against the horizon. "I've never had a home before," Flynn confessed softly. "Not a real one." Cassandra leaned into him, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. "And now," he kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Now I do." "It's not a place, though, it's you." 5 years later, the town of Riverton had grown considerably. The railroad had finally reached it, bringing new businesses and settlers. Cassandra's shop had expanded twice and now employed 3 young women from town. Flynn had bought out his partner at the livery and added a successful horse breeding operation. Their home on the edge of town had grown as well, with a new wing added to accommodate their family twin boys of 4 years with Flynn's blue eyes and Cassandra's copper hair, and a 2-year-old daughter who had her father wrapped firmly around her tiny finger. Gerald had divided his time between San Francisco and Riverton, finally settling permanently with his daughter and son-in-law when the twins were born. He delighted in his role as grandfather, telling the children stories of the old days and teaching them the same values of honesty and hard work that he had instilled in Cassandra. On the 5th anniversary of the Sweetwater Creek fire, Flynn and Cassandra stood together on their front porch, watching their children play in the yard under Gerald's watchful eye. Flynn's arm rested comfortably around his wife's waist, his fingers splayed protectively over the small swell of her belly where their 4th child was growing. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked quietly. "What might have happened if I hadn't been passing through that day?" Cassandra leaned into his embrace. "Sometimes, but then I remember something my mother used to say, that everything happens for a reason, even the hardest things." She looked up at him, her love evident in her eyes. "The fire took everything I thought I needed. But it led me to everything I truly needed." Flynn's gaze swept over their home, their children, the life they had built together. "From ashes to this," he murmured wonderingly. "Who would have thought it possible?" "I would," Cassandra replied with certainty. "The moment you pulled me from that fire and didn't stop running until we were safe, I knew you were a man who could do the impossible." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "And you've been proving me right every day since." As twilight descended on Riverton, the Ashwood family gathered on their porch. Flynn and Cassandra, Gerald and the children. They watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. For Flynn, who had spent so many years running from his past, the greatest miracle was not that he had saved Cassandra from the fire that day in Sweetwater Creek. The true miracle was that in doing so, she had saved him as well from loneliness, from fear, from a life of endless wandering. And as he held his family close, watching his children's faces illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern light, Flynn Ashwood knew with absolute certainty that he would never need to run again. He was, at long last, home.